What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So we're taking a look at the Ally X here and the OG Ally, and we're going to do a lot of comparing and just see how these are stacking up. I've spent about over a week with the Ally X and done a lot of comparing with the OG launch Ally that I have, and there really are a lot of differences when it comes to battery, game performance, the feel of the device, and all of that. So let's go ahead and get into it and check out this review / comparison. Alright, so the first thing we'll take a quick look at is the specs, and I pulled this over from the Asus website just to highlight some of the real differences, which is the battery, of course, double at 80 watt hours. We have double the storage with the 1 terabyte 2280. We have 24 gigs of DDR5X at 7500, which is going to make a big difference in some of our games. We have more comfortable grips. We have better, tighter springs in our joysticks, 8-way indicators on the D-pad, improved tactility on the buttons, smaller rear buttons, a change over to that extra USB-C instead of proprietary, louder speakers, improved 77 blade fans, and 100 watt charging. And besides that, the price difference between these two, of course, is $800 and $650, but we'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. But I would say pricing on this device is the only real negative that I've had to run into, but we can get more into that later on. Let's start off with the build and the comfort and the feel of these two devices. So Asus definitely made some changes here when it came to just the overall design of the device and how it feels. It's certainly a little bit heavier with more of that battery in there, but it's not super noticeable. Those back buttons being smaller though, and the grips and the bump outs are very noticeable, especially to somebody like me who might have a little bit bigger hands trying to use these devices. I find it to be a lot more comfortable with those changes. We have the more rounded corners, which honestly feels a ton better to hold in your hand as well. Now, the original Ally, it was fine. There's nothing major for me to complain about, but I always called it kind of a flat brick device, and my fingers often wrap around past those back buttons there, and I don't know, it just was never the most comfortable. The super loose sticks always really bothered me, just something I had issue with. And as far as the palms, it's fine, but I always kind of noticed that sharp cut out there a little bit more. Nothing major, but it just was never quite as ergonomic as I would have preferred a handheld, especially after using the Steam Deck so much. But over on the Ally X, it does feel a lot better for me. Sticks are tighter and feel way better. The buttons feel better. The triggers are redesigned and feel better. The curved edges sit better in my hands, and overall it feels really good. It's balanced pretty well, and the back grips certainly help for at least me to hold on to the device a little bit more comfortably, play a little longer with less hand fatigue, and it's really been nice. Now with these changes, the Ally X will sit just a little bit higher than the OG Ally with its profile there, you know, with the bump outs and everything happening with the device. But yeah, all in all, it's very similar, but a little bit more of a profile as it sits there. And of course, the change with the USB-Cs, which I really like, being able to use more of an external GPU and not just the proprietary ports. And the change to the trigger, something I really like, and the LB and RB buttons as well. Just easier for me to use, more comfortable overall. I think Asus has done a really good job with this refresh. Yes, it looks a lot like the original Ally, but when you put all these changes together between the buttons, the joysticks, the triggers, the change to the back buttons, the grips, all that stuff here, it really does come together to make a difference. It does feel like you're playing a different device, a more refined Windows handheld over other things that I've used. And it makes for a better gaming experience, which is why I have all of these devices, is to game on them and in handheld mode. So it definitely feels better when it comes to that, and feels something closer to like the MSI Claw when I'm holding it. Not quite as good as the Steam Deck, but close. But for me, much better than how the OG Ally felt. Now, talking about the screens, you may already notice that my Ally X screen is much better than my OG Ally screen, and we'll take a closer look at that. I was looking for some original articles about this, but I had trouble finding them. Linus mentions this as well. The OG Allies just didn't have as good of a screen.
That, and I have one of the OG Allies that has the dimmer 400 nit screen. As it is now, the later model ones seem to use the same 500 plus nit screen.
So totally depending on when you got your original Ally, it'll depend on if you see this change or this upgrade. But for me, I've never been happy with the screen on my original launch Ally. It always seemed dimmed and washed out no matter what brightness. And when I compare this to the Ally X, I was immediately surprised when everyone was saying it had the same screen at how much of a difference it was. I immediately noticed it. It's hard for me to capture the true difference here on camera, but you can definitely see it. And in person, it's even more exasperated than you see here. So I'm really happy for this change, but again, and depending on when you got your Ally, this may or may not be a change for you. So I definitely wanted to cover that here in the video, but I'm super happy that with the Ally X, my new daily driver for gaming, it just looks a lot better. This exact same scene here in Cyberpunk, exact same time of day and everything, just looks so much more well lit and better here on the Ally X because of that screen. So that's just something to be aware of if you're shopping and thinking about getting the Ally X and you have an OG Ally. Is what screen do you have, and are you going to have that difference when you get yours or not? Alright, but that's enough about the screens. I want to move on to the speakers because Asus does claim a louder and a more full sound from these speakers, and I do find that to be true in my comparisons, which really surprises me because the original Ally had some of the best speakers on a handheld I had really used. I really like them. So let me let you guys listen to some sample here and hear the difference between the speakers. Okay, and there you have it. And I use that sample because I feel like the gunshots and the reloads there just really help you at least hear, because if you're not in person, you can't truly hear the difference, but you can definitely hear it here in the video. And they are a more fuller sound and a louder speaker, and I'm surprised they really were able to improve upon the original Ally's speakers. Okay, and I want to take a look at the battery next. Now, I didn't get too deep here, but I did pay attention the past week while playing, and I did some tests in Cyberpunk as well. On the OG Ally, for at 25 watts, medium, 1080p, all that here, 45 minutes, 45 seconds, which I expected, and on the new Ally X, an hour and 46 minutes and 52 seconds, which was actually a little shy of what I normally get, so maybe something else was running, I don't know, but 25 watts, an hour 45 to 2 hours, 20 watts, 2 hours 15 to 2 hours 40, and 17 watts performance mode, 2.5 hours to 3 hours. This is just in typical in general what I'm noticing, but I would like to get more testing in on the battery and maybe cover that deeper in a future video, but that's definitely a nice improvement and helps with the battery anxiety because I am someone who plays these devices handheld and I don't like to be near the charger. Alright, so we've looked at a lot of stuff when it comes to comparing the Ally X and the original Ally here, and really it's been hard for me to come up with very many negatives on the Ally X. It's been a great device so far, but we're going to spend a bit of time on gaming because, of course, this is the most important thing about these devices. Not only do they need to be a good experience and comfortable to use, but game performance has to be good. Now, we're looking at the same Z1 Extreme, but because of that RAM speed being increased to 7500 from 6400 and getting 24 gigabytes instead of 16, there are going to be some differences in game performance. Now we'll start with some Starfield, and this is just the 8 gigs VRAM on the Ally X and 4 gigs of VRAM over on the OG Ally. We'll change that up here in a minute, but in this scene in Jameson and New Atlantis, you'll notice that same dip you get at the same spot all the time, and the Ally X really doesn't have that problem. Having the additional RAM and overhead for it to use what it really wants to use here, plus the additional speed, does help a bit, even though we're still at fairly low FPS. And right here where the OG Ally is going to have a dip down to 20 FPS, there's literally no change in the performance over on the Ally X side, and I repeated this quite a few times to make sure that was the case in this area. Switching over here to another scene, it's going to be very similar, but we've added 6 gigs of VRAM option on the Ally just to give us more of a view of how these games are performing here. Now the increased RAM speed gives us a little higher FPS when it comes to the graphics here, and the amount of RAM may help with that a little bit, but more it's probably going to help with how smooth things are and having less frame rate drops or dips. So overall you're going to see better cooling too, so Asus is definitely hitting the mark a little bit better when it comes to the fans, and you'll see that if you look at the temps as we go through the rest of the games. But better cooling, better performance, at least in the games I've been testing so far. Over here on Cyberpunk, it's going to be a very similar story across the board here. You can see the 8 gigs, 4 gigs, and 6 gigs. Overall performance is a good bit higher over on the Ally X in some areas. Again, the system having more room to use the RAM it wants to helps, but in this case, if you're looking at the RAM usage, the 6 gig is doing okay. It is gimping the system a little bit though, so you're seeing over on the Ally X it wants to use about 10 versus the 8 over on that side, so it is getting eating into the system RAM and is going to cause some issues with this performance if you keep doing that as well. So not having to worry about that on the Ally X, having the 8 gigs and 16 available makes a big difference with the set it and forget it there. And we got 51.6 versus 48.08 and 48.86 for their scores across there. So a nice little increase and definitely some better performance. The game just overall feels better not having so many dips as well. We'll walk around a little bit and show some real world game performance here as well, not just the benchmark in this one. 4 gigs does have more trouble because as you can see, the game wants to use a little over 4 for the most part running these settings, which is around medium and at the 25 watts. So yeah, having more system RAM available does help, but in this game the VRAM is actually helping a bit on the 6 gigs more, just the way this game is running. But overall performance, the Ally X just having the additional RAM and speed on its side is definitely crushing the 4 gig option and still keeping up with and beating the 6 gig option from the OG Ally here in Cyberpunk. Now jumping over to some Shadow of the Tomb Raider for an older game, because I want to see what would happen with that, because RAM's really not going to be an issue. 4G, 6G, whatever. We're just not going to use up all of the system RAM even at 16 gigs anyway in this game. So that really brings me down to the speed of the RAM making the difference here, and maybe other changes on the motherboard and things like that. But ultimately, yeah, we are increasing performance to 3 FPS in a lot of areas here just due to that. GPU does like higher RAM speeds, and AMD in general tends to as well. And you can see the results, 45 versus 43 and 43. Not really any difference in the RAM for the OG Ally, but we definitely get a little boost over here on the Ally X for that one. Now, Assassin's Creed Mirage, another one I wanted to take a look at, and this one will prove and kind of show the reason why 6 gigs isn't always the best option. 4 gigs of VRAM will actually perform better in this game because we need system RAM available for Assassin's Creed Mirage. It likes to have system RAM. There's going to be a lot of games, especially coming out, that want more system RAM. And while the Ally X does a great job of beating both of these, sometimes at 6, 7, 8, 9 FPS there, the 4 gigs on the OG actually runs better than the 6. So 49, 46, and 43 there. So always be aware when you're on one of those 16 gig devices, what you're running and what game you're playing. You may need to make some adjustments. Now just looking at 8 gigs and 6 gigs here for the Ally X and the OG Ally and Forza Horizon 5. So again, RAM's not a big issue when it comes to this game. I was interested in if the RAM speed or the other changes may make a difference, and it does. In this game, we actually get quite a big difference in performance consistently, and I noticed that when I was playing it the other night, just sitting there. I said, I really got to compare this one because it feels so much better just before I had even compared them. In the benchmark alone, 6 FPS more, much more stable, and out in real world gameplay, it feels great as well. So overall, an improvement. So all 5 of those games see some type of improvement in performance, FPS, smoothness, and cooling over on the Ally X. So again, it becomes kind of hard to really complain about the device other than the increased price, which again, we can talk about a little bit more in the outro. But gaming performance and the way this device feels, I am really, really enjoying it over the original Ally. Now, before we move on to some final thoughts and stuff, I do want to mention the JSO dock that's going to be coming for the Ally X that you're going to be able to order and use. I'll put a link in the description as well. Big shout out to them for sending this over, as well as the other RGB dock that they have to use with all these devices and test out. And I just thought I would mention it. This could be a decent little 2-piece dock for your Ally X if you're looking to pick one up. Again, I'll put a link in the description, and I'll probably showcase this in some more videos actually checking it out as well. But let's get into the final thoughts I have when it comes to the Ally X. So the Ally X is really just a good refresh from asus. Pretty much everything about it has been improved upon. There's more storage that you don't have to change out yourself, and it's a great device to game on. It's definitely been a good experience so far, better than a lot of the launches I've experienced with other handhelds or even the original Ally, which still has a broken SD card reader for the second time. I haven't run into any problems yet with the Ally X, and I hope it stays that way because it does feel like a more fleshed out, more premium Windows handheld. It's still Windows, and there are still some of those caveats that come with that, but it's quickly becoming the handheld that I would recommend depending on your budget. It is that $800 price tag over the $650 of the OG Ally, but with the increased RAM amount and speed with double the storage and all the refinements, it's kind of hard to argue it as well. However, I do hope that when we get the next generation of handhelds from Asus and others, that these kind of improvements in a device like this more falls back down into that $600 to $700 range, because I still think that the $300 to $700 range in general is the best place for handhelds. But this is a really great start. I think Valve did a great job with their refresh of the Steam Deck OLED. I love that device. And now when it comes to the Windows side of things, the Ally X is really winning me over. Asus has done a great job with this. And again, besides maybe the price tag, I haven't found a lot to complain about yet. But anyways, guys, I think you've learned enough from this video when it comes to game performance and some of the other changes and my thoughts on the Ally X. Thanks a lot for coming to check out the video. As always, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.